So I'm just going to give a shout out to my wife, who it turns out does way more than I ever realized she does on a weekly basis. Like way more, until I had to personally do all of that stuff myself this weekend. And so Mother's Day is past. I just, it's over, so there's no card pressure, there's no Hallmark. Like, big Hallmark is not kind of knocking on my door when I say, like, just, my mom passed away a few years ago. If your mom is still around, celebrate her while you can, when you realize all the stuff that your moms do for you. Thank the Lord for them. Why do I bring this up? I bring this up because this morning we are talking about emotions. And there's this kind of stereotype, isn't there? That moms, women can have emotions. Men, right? I couldn't preach this sermon on Father's Day, right? That would be odd, right? There is that. But here's the truth. We know that that's not really true, because I have some tools that I love dearly. And if something happened to those tools, I would have no problem expressing my emotions. I also know that if men didn't have emotions, Super Bowl Sunday wouldn't be that big of a deal. I also know that if men didn't have emotions, you wouldn't be able to get away with $70,000 pickup trucks. But you can. Okay? So as we step into this, I just want to recognize that when we talk about emotions and feelings, there's lots of different ways that we've grown up kind of thinking about these things or processing these things. And there are certain stereotypes that we have that women will have all of these emotions and that men will have no emotions. And so then we say, oh, someone's being emotional, as if that's a negative thing. Or if a man is being emotional, then there's something wrong with him too. Do you see what we do? We take these things that God has given us and we layer them with baggage. And the truth is, our emotions have enough baggage on their own already. They don't need any other extra baggage for us to be able to process them and talk about this morning. So I just want to acknowledge that some of us are going to come here and we have no problem expressing every feeling that we have. And there are some of us here who have lived with folks, or maybe we are that person, that almost never think it's appropriate to say how you feel. That's just kind of the tension that we live in. But if you have ever missed a moment because you didn't connect with someone at an emotional level, and you wish you could go back and fix it, or if you've ever ruined a moment because you overreacted and you wish you could go back and fix it, then the book of Proverbs has the ability to help us understand what we do with our emotions. And so we're going to look at that this morning. How do we deal with our feelings? What does the Bible say about them? And the first thing that we need to see, sorry, as I get set with my phone here, is we have to accept the reality of emotions as if they're not a problem. And maybe some of you have been taught that you shouldn't share how you feel. You should keep it to yourself. That's not an appropriate way to kind of say anything. And so maybe you've just been taught that the best thing to do is bottle them up, is keep them close. Proverbs, though, says that you have emotions. The way that it talks about it actually is kind of, there's this idea that there is an outer life that you have, and there's also an inner life that all of us have. A happy heart makes the face cheerful. Heartache crushes the Spirit. A happy heart makes the face cheerful. Even there it's saying that there is something inside of us going on that affects what's coming out of us. That this inner life that we have does kind of pour out to those around us. But it also says that there's stuff going on. A heartache crushes the spirit. That these things don't just come out so that if I'm smiling, that means I'm happy. But that there's other things kind of churning in our hearts that we're processing. There are things that we're hoping for that we don't want to kind of talk about too much. There are things that we're worried about that we think about if we name them, they'll come true in the worst case. So we churn through these things internally. It says that there's an external side of us and there's an internal side of us. And that they have the ability to be damaged. They have the ability to be hurt and beat up. Proverbs 14:30 says, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." Now, if you've been reading Proverbs with us, you'll see emotions all over the place. Some of them positive, some of them negative. And I just want to kind of acknowledge that I'm not going to this morning say, okay, let's categorically go through all of these different emotions. We're just going to kind of talk about emotions generally. And part of the reason for that is that last year we preached 2 sermon series. One on the fruit of the Spirit, which talks a lot about positive emotions and kind of that internal life. And we talked about the 7 deadly sins, those kind of negative things that churn through our hearts. Both of those sermon series are available on our website. And so we often say that one interaction with God's holy word ought to lead to other interactions with God's holy word. And so if you've been reading through Proverbs and you've said, I really hope that Sam, for instance, talks about jealousy or envy or anger, and I don't do that this morning, maybe that's the Lord kind of nudging you that you ought to spend some more time diving into His Word or diving into one of those messages that might help you in a more specific way. But back to this passage. A heart at peace gives life to the body. There's something internally going on that affects how we externally feel. And apparently doctors know this, right? That if you're anxious, if you're worried all the time, you're going to increase your rates of things like heart attack, stress, strokes. That all of those things come if you don't have a heart of peace. It affects your body. And so we just have to recognize that there are emotions that are living in our lives. Now, it's funny because we talk about the heart. That tends to be where we think about it. Or maybe we think about, I've been thinking about something, and we kind of put our emotions somewhere in our brains, or maybe we're split and we're not sure what to do. So we say, my mind is saying one thing, my heart is saying another. Proverbs in the Bible is not as specific and kind of nitpicky about those things. In fact, the Hebrew often talk about the gut. They just say, my gut, so that if you were a good Hebrew, you're writing a Valentine's Day card, I would say, Joanna, I love you with all of my gut. Now, that doesn't work in English, I get it. But it's just kind of recognizing that we're not talking about a physical part of us. We're talking about this internal reality of who we are. We're talking about these things internally to us that mix and move, and it's not just in our body. This was one of God's great lessons to me when we had our son Sylvan, who was born where Sylvan's entire brain, they can look at the CAT scan, almost his entire brain, it is mal-shaped, and yet his soul is untouched by his physical disability. That there's an internal life, and if you know Sylvan, if you've been around him, there is lots going on internally in Sylvan that is unaffected by the physicality of his body. So we're not just talking about our body that can't be seen. We're talking about something internal to who we are in all of these things. And the Bible takes these things seriously. Which means that if there are things going on in your life, if your sleep is disrupted, if your muscles are twisted over, and it's not a medical thing, that maybe it's a heart thing, maybe it's an emotion thing, maybe there is something going on that you're processing, that you need to say, what do I need to do? How do I need to engage with this with the Lord? Because a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy and many other negative emotions rot your bones. Now, some of us totally get this. And in fact, some of us don't just acknowledge our emotions, we've come to the point where we let our emotions simply define who we are. Maybe one emotion over all, and so you just say, maybe you do this, right? Because normally we don't say these about ourselves unless they're positive. But if we know somebody and we say, they're just an angry person. Have you ever said that of somebody else? You wouldn't want somebody to say that of you. You wouldn't want to say that of yourself. Don't mind me, I'm just an angry person. But you might say, don't mind me, I'm just a happy person. That we allow certain emotions, or we think, or maybe you've grown up, that you've lived in a home where you had to carry certain emotions. You had to project certain emotions all the time. And so you think you are those emotions. Proverbs doesn't talk about it that way. The Bible says you have emotions, but the Bible doesn't say that you are your emotions. In fact, sometimes it'll say, because of sin, because of the fact that our world is broken and internally we're broken too, we're going to have emotions that aren't going to be good. So if I'm happy because of someone else's failure, so for instance, if I'm driving and somebody cuts me off, and then they get into a car accident, and there's a small part of me that says they deserved it, that's not a good emotion. Even though it's happiness, which is a good emotion, right? Or if I'm grieving and I'm sad, I'm mourning because I lost someone, or one of those stupid Google photos showed me a picture of 5 years ago. This just happened a few days ago. It was about 6 years ago that we had the last trip with my mom before she passed away a month later. And all of a sudden, it was like, I got all those feels about missing my mom. Now we said grief is a sad emotion. It's kind of a negative emotion. We'll talk in a few minutes about Revelation, where it says there's going to be no more grief one day. But sometimes you can have an emotion like grief, and it actually be a really, really good and helpful thing. Jesus grieves. Just process this. Jesus goes to the tomb of one of his best friends who has died, and he grieves. It actually says he cries, which is like, not only does he have emotions, but the stuff inside then affects the outside, and he weeps over the death of his friend, even though he knows that like 20 seconds later, he is going to say to this guy, Lazarus, get up and walk out of there. But just the reality of death is terrible. The Bible says that death is the last enemy. I'm so looking forward to the day when Jesus knocks that last enemy on its butt. And so there are some emotions that are negative emotions, but it's proper for us to have them and to deal with them. But then other of us, we go the opposite route, and we downplay emotions. We don't want to talk about them. We don't want to deal with them. And Proverbs also says that they're acceptable. Right? You are not your emotions, but your emotions are not a liability. That's the way that Proverbs talks about them. And so then what do? We have to learn to actually recognize your emotions. This passage kind of stumped me for a little bit. Just kind of sit in this for a second. Each heart knows its own bitterness, and no one else can share its joys. There's stuff going on inside of you that your closest friend does not see, that your spouse does not see, that your loved ones do not see, that you could sit with a counselor and they don't fully get it. They don't fully see it. Every heart knows its own bitterness. There is just stuff that each and every one of us carries and has, and it's just there. And so how do we learn to recognize those emotions? Because as I said, right, some positive emotions are not good and some negative emotions are not bad. And these things can weigh on us. They can weigh us, and we get warned in Proverbs, actually, that these things matter in our lives. And if we are around people that can't recognize their own emotions, what happens is that the heart is only known by ourselves, but once they kind of begin pouring out of us, they begin pouring into other people's lives. Do not make a friend with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared. I don't want anybody to put their hands up. But when you read that, how many people in this room say, should folks move away from me if they read this passage? Because I'll be honest, that was the first thing that I thought when I read this, when I was preparing for this sermon. Because even when I'm trying my hardest to kind of just process things, I just lose my temper. You can ask Gabe. He's in the front row. Gabe, do I ever lose my temper? You're supposed to say no. But then you're supposed to be honest because we're in church. He says yes. Well, I'll deal with you later. But there's a danger in letting our emotions just rule over us. There is a danger in letting our emotions just kind of go all over the place and not just fill up our lives, but pour into others. And so part of what you have to do is you have to learn to discern what emotions are going on in your heart. Nobody else can know what's going on in your heart, but eventually it's going to come to the point where everyone can see what's going on in your heart, if you understand what I'm saying. And this stuff can be heavy. It is important. Proverbs 18 says it like this: the human spirit can endure in sickness, but a crushed spirit who can bear? That if we are not willing to just kind of actually do the work to figure out what's going on in here internally, if we just think, it's just who I am and I'm just going to be me all the time, and me is just emotional, and we just kind of pour that everywhere, or we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to deal with it. It's better to let sleeping dogs lie, maybe you say. But internally there's stuff going on that builds up and builds up and builds up. And those emotions are meant to show us stuff going on. They're meant to alert us to things. I want you to imagine it's the middle of the night and you're sleeping, and the alarm, the fire alarm, goes off in your house. And you pop up, and your loved one, the first loved one you run into, maybe it's a kid, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a spouse, says, "Oh, that's just a fire alarm. Go back to bed." I'm sorry, what? Yeah, it's just a fire alarm. Go back to bed. See, you would say, well, shouldn't I explore the fact? Shouldn't we figure out if there's a fire in our house? And the answer is obviously yes. And when it comes to what's going on inside of our heart, there are these emotions, there are these things churning, and there is this tension where most of the time nobody knows what's going on in your heart until it's almost too late and you are just like kind of flaming and the house is on fire. And so what you need to do is you need to figure out, how do I actually get to the point where it's not so much that I'm aware of what's going on, but your awareness ought to lead you to do something about it, right? I mean, you wouldn't go back to sleep if the fire alarm went off and somebody said, oh, don't worry about it, it's just a fire alarm, go back to bed. And so if there are things going on in your life that you're aware of because your emotions, when it comes to our internal life, we then have to figure out, what do we do with those things? And what Proverbs tells us, that we really ought to work to regulate your emotions. Now, some of this language, I understand, it's tricky. And you know, which way do you talk about it? Do you control your emotions? Do you just kind of bottle them? No, we're not talking about that. But that's why this word regulate is probably helpful. And there have been other people beyond that word regulate is not a Sam didn't come up with that. There are lots of folks, psychologists, who have said that a healthy way to deal with our emotions is to regulate them. Think about it like this: if you were ever doing remember the old faucets? Now they're all safer now, but you remember the old faucets where it was hot and cold separate, and you were going to have a bath or take a shower, and you'd have to deal with the cold and the hot, and you'd have to adjust them so you didn't either put yourself in an ice bath or burn someone or you burn yourself, right? And you have to regulate those things. You have to adjust them and figure out what. And then in a similar way, we have to. That's what we're called to do with our heart. And you say, well, Sam, we can't do that. You can't regulate your emotions. Proverbs says you can. Proverbs says you should. The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered. I'm not going to go back to that passage about stay away from an angry person, because it would point to me as much as anyone in here. Whoever has understanding is even-tempered. See, Proverbs, like we've talked about this, is written to help you understand what's the best way you can just live in this world. And one of the things that Proverbs says is that there is a way for you to live where you are processing your emotions. You're regulating them, you're acknowledging them, but you're not letting them control you. You're not trying to push them down, thinking that if I push them down hard enough, they'll never pop up again. They always do. But there's a way of saying, I can be even-tempered in the way that I feel about these things. Now, I know that this might be challenging for some of us, because there are probably some of you here who have been told your whole life there is kind of a certain way that you're supposed to act when it comes to your emotions. There are certain practices that you're supposed to, and maybe it's boys don't cry. Maybe it's women get criticized for showing their emotions in the workplace. And so you try to bottle, whatever it is. There are all these things. And so we have this weird feeling of I'm not going to deal with that because I've been told I've been shamed out of it, basically. And maybe it's deeper than that. Maybe you just let your emotions run. Maybe you've heard somebody say, that's just how our family communicates. Maybe you've said, or maybe somebody has said to you a few moments after an outburst, you know it didn't mean anything. Proverbs says that doesn't have to be the way that you live. And it warns us of the danger of not regulating our emotions. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. Have you ever just totally let the faucet just fully open on your anger? And it's always worked out well for you, right? Obviously. Me too. But the wise bring calm in the end. There's a regulating. You turn that down. When I was first married, I would have said that's just how our family communicates. And Joanna's family was totally different. I would have said, we're Italian, we're just passionate people. And I would have said to my wife, you're just German, you're just English, you guys are quiet, you're reserved, that's just who you are. And then one day, I got into, my dad, we were on the phone, and I was driving somewhere, and he was trying to give me directions. This was before GPS. We had, not even a flip phone yet. It was like that Nokia, that rubberized Nokia cell phone. And it was costing me like $4 a minute because I didn't know if I was roaming yet. And I was trying to figure out where I was supposed to go. And I was losing my patience. And my dad was losing his patience that I didn't know where I was going because he was trying to give me directions for a place that he had been a lot and a place that I had never been to before. And so he thought, how could you not know where this thing is? And we were screaming at each other on the phone, just losing it. And I got off the phone and Joanna said, I don't care if you've done that 1,000 times before. That is not okay. And that was really helpful to me. Because we have these ideas that there are certain emotions that we just kind of throw out. And there are some that you've thrown out that it's not okay that you've done that. And so we have to process. We have to figure out, how do I then turn that down? Now you can ask Gabe and he'll tell you that I haven't figured out how to do that all the time yet, have I, Gabe? But we have to accept and realize I don't want to give full vent to my emotions. I don't want to have a flood. I don't want to drown my family in the emotions that I'm feeling. I didn't see it, my wife did, praise God for her. And then I came to passages like this week. A quick-tempered person does foolish things. And I thought, oh man, I see you. It's okay. The Lord sees you. The Lord knows. A quick-tempered person does foolish things. Those who respond to their emotions quickly. Now, this is... who wants to be associated with, and the one who devises evil schemes is hated. They're kind of sandwiched together. I don't want to be associated with that. And so Proverbs tells us, you don't have to be quick-tempered, but you have to recognize if you are quick-tempered. Now, what that means then is that we can understand, okay, I'm not supposed to give full vent to my emotions. I'm not. I have to process them differently. I have to figure out what's going on. One of the things that I if it's up here, we're always looking for resources to recommend to our church, and I just finished this little book, and I thought it was excellent. It's called Getting Over Yourself. What it is it's a Christian counselor that says, okay, you have a situation that makes you angry. Why? You have a situation that makes you sad. that makes you anxious, that makes you overwhelmed. And it's not about you kind of going and fixing everything. It just says, you can't manage everybody else, but you can figure out, why did I respond that way? And you can control how you respond. Now, what you can't do and what the Bible doesn't say, is that what you need to do is tell other people how they're supposed to respond. In fact, when we can go out of Proverbs for a second. We go to like Romans, and Romans says, rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. But there are things going on in our life, and there are things going on in someone else's life. And it is not your job to try to take your feelings and make everybody else feel your feelings about a given situation. This idea, behavioral scientists call it matching. It's this idea that when somebody is happy, you can respond and come alongside them in their happiness and kind of name and recognize their happy. Maybe you're not happy about it. Maybe you're a Boston Red Sox fan and the Yankees just won the World Series, but you're both brothers in Christ. I know that sounds like, can such things happen? But you can come alongside and say, I can see why you're happy. I can recognize why you're excited. Even why I do not feel that way at all in this moment. Recruiters at NASA actually realized that this ability, the ability to come alongside other people in their emotions, was their top reason for including somebody in a deep space mission, like a mission to Mars or a mission to the moon. That they actually kicked people out of the NASA program who were better pilots, better scientists, because they couldn't emotionally come alongside other people and understand what was going on in that moment for that person. And Proverbs tells us that this is important. Like one who takes away a garment on a cold day, or like vinegar poured on a wound, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. But there's a reality that there are emotions going on that you can't just kind of force people to feel a certain way because it makes you anxious that they have those emotions. And that's often what happens, right? We see somebody who's mourning, and we don't want to deal with that whole idea of mourning or grieving. We see somebody who's upset, and we don't want to get upset. And so we just kind of try to say, no. We don't match. We don't come alongside. We crash into them and say, you should feel a different way. Proverbs says, that's like sting on a wound. That's like pulling a blanket off on a cold day. It's not something that we should be thinking about. We just have to recognize that other people have different ways of processing and feeling, and we shouldn't put our anxieties and our uncertainties on them. But honestly, what is so interesting about all this is just how important all of this is. Because maybe we think, well, this whole heart thing, this whole emotions thing, it's a nice extra. But here's what the beginning of Proverbs opens with. Above all else, guard your heart. For everything you do flows from it. It's funny, my mom and dad, when they first got married, they bought an Atari. And so they played video games together. And And so then when we were growing up, video games were like an acceptable part of our life. And so I played video games with my mom and my dad, and I know it's like a kind of a weird, nerdy thing. Now everybody plays video games, so I don't feel as bad about it. Some of you play games on your phone and you don't want to tell anybody. I know it. But what's fun now is that I also get to play video games with my kids. And in lots of video games, there's like, okay, you can beat the level or you can kind of succeed at the game, but then there's always this like kind of extra thing you can do. Like if you're playing Super Mario, you can get all the coins or all the stars. There's that kind of like extra bonus thing that you can do. And like really big video games, they call it a side quest. You can go on all these other side quests. You can do all these extra things in a game, but they're not essential to you playing the game. Some of us look at emotions and emotional intelligence and just kind of emotional health, and we think it's a great side quest. Proverbs does not treat your heart as a side quest. And so there are things that you want in your life. Maybe it's a sense of security. Maybe it's a different relationship. Maybe it's a way of looking at yourself or looking at others. And you think you can go after those things without engaging with your heart because the heart's just an extra thing. And the Bible says, no, your heart is a central thing. Everything you do flows from it. And so we have to process it. But then how do we actually do that? We have to do, and this is hard because I think we all know the reason that we don't like talking about our emotions is because of those negative experiences. Those experiences when you were happy and somebody crushed your happiness because they weren't happy. Those emotions of sorrow that you've tried to shake off and they still stick to you. How do we deal with them? How do we process them? Are we just left on our own? Does the Bible say, like, here's this thing, you're stuck with it, goodbye? No. What we have to do is trust God for the restoration of your emotions. And there's this deep tension that we live in, where Psalm 43 says, God heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. He knows what's going on. I think one of the Proverbs that I didn't quote says, God knows everything about life and death and destruction. Of course, He knows the heart. He knows the heart, and He heals the brokenhearted. But we could say, but I've been brokenhearted and I haven't felt that kind of healing. I've been in grief and haven't felt that. How do we deal with this? Well, we're told, do not let your heart envy sinners, but always be zealous for the fear of the Lord. There is surely a future hope for you, and your hope will not be cut off. What Proverbs says is the reality of that there is what theologians call an already and a not yet. That there is stuff that can be changed, there's stuff that is changing, and then there's just stuff that you say, why, Lord, is it not fixed already? And we live in the tension of God heals the brokenhearted, and there is surely a future hope for you. And that's hard. And so I want to end, not in Proverbs, we're going to jump to the end of the Bible. At the very end of the Bible, almost the last chapter, Revelation 21, I actually have this tattooed on my arm. It's so important to me. It says this, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away." This is a picture of everything finally being done. This is what is God moving towards. This is the goal. This is the end. This is like the completed story. That's what's being set up here. And I heard a loud voice saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and He will dwell with them, and they will be His people, and God Himself will be their God." And it says this, "And He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old things have passed away." How good does that sound? In those moments of grief and sorrow and heartache and shame and anxiety, for the future set in front of us, a day when all of that will be done. No more racing hearts, no more nervousness, no more crying, no more fear, no more emotions kind of pouring in and ruining. And then it ends with this, and I love this. It seems so weird. "He who's seated on the throne said, 'I am making everything new.' And then he said this, 'Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true.'" You can take this to the bank. I'm making a promise to you. He says, "I am going to make all things new," including our hearts, including our emotions, including the inner life that right now feels in just kind of stress and churn. But right now, today, there is a way to live looking in anticipation to the day when everything will be made new. There is a way to understand and recognize our feelings. There's a way to admit that they're there and not let them control us. There's a way to turn up some of them and turn down some of them. There is an invitation to allow our emotions to be a part of who we are, but not take control of everything that we are. All knowing that in front of us is the promise of a God who loves you and cares for you and is going to dwell with you and is going to undo every terrible thing, make everything new. And these words are trustworthy and true. Let's pray.